There was one article that I so vividly remember about these parents who gave their daughter a bracelet, and there was a stone, and the first stone represented holding hands, and the next stone represented kissing, and and they were like, you have to give the stone to the boy that you first boy that you hold hands with, the first boy that you kiss, to represent the value that you're giving away. And the goal, the ultimate best thing ever would be to give every stone to your husband. So then he can give you back your bracelet. And you're like, what?
So great to see you here. And I love hearing your educational background, because it brings to mind a really great story that I love to share. My mom, for anyone on this call who knows my mom, she's a loving, kind, supportive woman of God. She doesn't always get the details right in the stories that she tells. And so at one point, my mom was talking about Rebecca, and she said, she's like a genius or something. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, I think in college she studied like germ worm warfare. And what she meant was bioethics. So
very similar to germ worm warfare.
Very, very similar. So I'm super excited to hear about all that you bring in about who's going to win this year, the germs or the worms. Seems like the coronavirus, maybe the germs are winning. I'm not positive.
Germs are edging out, yeah.
They are. But I would love, just to start us off, just if you can share a little bit about yourself. We heard a little bit, like just the kind of overview of who you are, but how did you end up in ministry? What got you thinking about youth, and just how did you get where you are today in that regard?
Sure. Yeah. So I, like Deb said, I grew up in Northwest Georgia. I like to say I grew up in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And I grew up at a very conservative church, and I was super involved in church, love church. And I'm grateful for my background. And then when I came up to Trinity to study bioethics, just got involved in youth ministry. I've really been involved in youth ministry, I don't know, probably 8 to 10 years now. I don't know. I'd have to do the math, but been involved with youth. Just love talking to high schoolers and middle schoolers. And I really like talking about controversial topics. And I mean, if you know a high schooler or a middle schooler, like sex and dating, come on, that's like the most interesting topic that you can talk about with them. So yeah, I think that that's just been something that has kind of grown over the years. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. So you said you came from a very conservative church.
I did.
And we can, I was just listening to a podcast where they were basically talking about how the metaphor that they used was that you can go to a hospital and there's a category of disease that you can pick up while you're in the hospital. And so even though you're there to get healed, you can get diseases from just being in the environment. And so a lot of people look back on their church experience and they're like, my church growing up gave me the gospel. It gave me my love of the Bible, love of Jesus. But sometimes there can be some like disease, like there's can be some messed up ideas, ways that they talked about things. So from your experience, do you feel like you were seeing that purity culture in the buckle of the Bible Belt? And like, what's your experience in that area?
Yeah, I think, thankfully I had very wise parents who were not like pushing purity culture really at all. But my church was very, very, we're going to pass around a present and then ask, would anyone like this present? And because the present's been handled by so many people and now it looks messed up. And, it's just like, so just completely screwed up in the way that we look at, and this was to the girls, right? Our bodies are a gift to our future husband, right? And you stay pure for your spouse. And so I think that is something that I'm very grateful that my parents were kind of chill about. And then also, as I've talked to students, just kind of dismantling that of like, no, marriage is not the finish line. We don't stay pure for our future spouse. We stay pure for Jesus. Jesus is the treasure, not marriage, not sex, and not, for women, are giving our, bodies to our future husbands. So I definitely, I just kind of grew up with that. I remember one specific, like I got this magazine, this like young girl teen magazine called Brio when I was growing up. And there was one article that I so vividly remember about these parents who gave their daughter a bracelet, and there was a stone, and the first stone represented holding hands, and the next stone represented kissing, and da 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 da. Da. And they were like, you have to give the stone to the boy that you first boy that you hold hands with, the first boy that you kiss, to represent the value that you're giving away. And the goal, the ultimate best thing ever would be to give every stone to your husband. So then he can give you back your bracelet. And you're like, what? So now I'm just kind of like, what the heck? So yeah, I definitely can see that. Very grateful that it was not as, I would say, ingrained in me. But I see even the effects of purity culture on my friends, on students that I minister to. And yeah, I think my church growing up gave me so much, like you said, but then there were some things that weren't really a full picture.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So you're with kids, right? What keeps you from just defaulting to the opposite extreme? Because I think a lot of people see purity culture. I'm reading this book by Linda K. Klein. It's called, I think, Pure. If anyone wants to link it in the chat, it's if you ever want to feel depressed about how the church has talked about this, read this book. It's the most brutal account of what the church has done. And so people can see that and they can say, we just gotta get rid of this. This is clearly the wrong way. We gotta default to the exact opposite. And so we see very, I don't know what the right, like sexual liberation, like anything is fine. Anything's good under the sun. Jesus would want me to be able to express my sexuality and have sex with whoever I want. What keeps you from saying that's the right answer? Like what makes you say there's gotta be something else?
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at scripture, first of all, but also, we were made to operate within boundaries. People can overdo that, right? But God has designed us, I believe, to operate within certain boundaries, and He has designed sex to operate within certain boundaries. And it's like the old saying that, or the old, I don't know, example of a train, and a train was made to run on tracks. And if you take the train and you take it off the tracks and you say, "Train, you're free, go wherever you want to," the train is not free, right? The train is only free if it's operating on its boundaries. And I think that God has made us in such a way that we operate the best when we operate within His boundaries. And I see students operating the best when they operate within His boundaries, including boundaries for sexuality, and in a world where culture is absolutely saying it is oppressive and repressive to have any boundaries on sex and sexuality. For the church, like, we have to have the right thing to say, because God is the one that made sex, right? And we have His word. And so we have to have the right answer to say, no, 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 we can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's problems with purity culture. Absolutely. However, there are boundaries, and we were made and designed to operate within them. Yeah.
Yeah. So I threw out a couple potential ways, to talk about sex, to think about sex, some of those principles. Do you feel like what from your perspective felt like that would be the most helpful? Is there anything that's missing? Do you feel like this would need to be nuanced? But like, what's just your overall thoughts to kind of the picture that I threw out there? And like I've said, I always tell the guests, you do not have to agree with me. You do not have to say everything is fine with what you said. You could say, Anthony, I think what you said is dead wrong. So
Yeah.
like, just from your perspective, what seems helpful? What seems to me needs to be nuanced more?
Sure. No, I mean, I agree with definitely what you said. I think that something maybe to add is looking at not what sex is not, but what is sex, and what has God designed sex to be in a Christian marriage. What is the purpose of sex? And I think even when talking to, couples who aren't married, right? It's like, okay, what is the purpose of sex, and how is it best? Like, I said that we are designed to operate within boundaries. Well, it's like, how is it that sex operates the best within boundaries? And looking at that, like, God has designed sex. He has given us sex as a good and a beautiful gift, which I don't know, you may have a question later about this, but I think churches often either go to way overvaluing sex, like you talked about, absolutely, but I've also seen churches that way devalue sex. It's dirty, it's shameful. We don't talk about it. We have one talk a year where we're like, hey kids, don't do it. It's bad. And then once you get married, yeah, if you have sexual problems in your marriage, don't come to the church, right? That's dirty. It's weird. Like, it's necessary for children. And, you know, wives are supposed to give their bodies to their husbands because husbands have sexual urges and whatever. And then we don't talk about it, right? And that also is the wrong view. That's devaluing sex. That's not valuing this good gift that God has given us. And I think that, you know, we hold those two, there's a middle ground between those two, which, you know, I think you know, absolutely said.
Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, it seems like the real issue is promiscuity. If it's within a dating relationship, it's committed. Why is that such a big issue? Like, if you have two students who come to you and they're in a long-term romantic dating relationship, they're like, we plan on getting married. What's the counseling that you give them? Like, obviously you can say, hey, I think the Bible thinks this is wrong, but that's not always the most helpful for some people when they're like, you know, for whatever reasons. It can be helpful to say, also, here's why the Bible thinks it's wrong. Because I do think there are some things in the Bible that are like, God just wants you to trust us on this. But I think most of the, like you said, the tracks help you actually have a more flourishing life. So what do you tell the couple that walks in and they're asking you that exact question? Why should they wait?
Yeah, well, and you know, I do think being like, oh, the Bible says so, right? That's just like a trite throwaway answer. But saying like Jesus is the treasure, right? Like, he's what we are seeking, and that he's really like loving Jesus more. That is our goal. So if this couple is a Christian, I'm gonna say like, love Jesus more. Like, that is what he has called us to. And he has asked us to put these boundaries up. So first, let's trust Jesus and love him more. And then second, from a, like you said, just a practical standpoint, right? Waiting to have sex when you're married is better. It leads to more flourishing. Also, if they're students, I'm going to be like, yeah, right, you're going to be together forever. You know, you think you are, and then you're like, yeah, okay. Right. So the way that I'm going to talk about this to a 15-year-old couple or a 16-year-old couple, and the way I'm going to talk about to this with, you know, a 26-year-old couple or whatever, like, it's very, very different. But let's say that it is the 26-year-old couple that's like, we're going to get married. We just aren't engaged yet, blah, blah, blah. You know, you fill in the blank. Why not? There's also like physiological evidence that would support a lifelong monogamous relationship. So like Deb said, I teach anatomy and physiology. And there are hormones that actually increase the longer that you're with the same partner. Okay, so oxytocin is the hug hormone. It makes you feel good. And what can happen when you're with the same partner for this extended time, right? Forever. It's a positive feedback loop, right? You having sex with this long-term partner increases your oxytocin, which makes you more attracted to them, which makes you want to have sex with them, which makes you increase, right? So it only increases with time. Whereas endorphins that you get with a new sexual partner, right? There is something exciting about a new sexual partner. Like, we can say that in the church, like, yeah, we get it. It's exciting, right? There are endorphins, but over time, as you have new sexual partners, actually the peak that you can have with those endorphins decreases, right? So the good time that you have with the new sexual partner, you can't reach that same level over time with additional sexual partners. And the amount of oxytocin that you can have actually decreases. So physiologically, it makes sense to have one lifelong sexual partner, which we would say in a Christian marriage.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad that you got to use your germ worm
I use my
background.
germ worm warfare. That's right.
I love it. I love it. I was talking to someone about this too, and I want to make this not long-winded, but I think that there's this trajectory too where usually, and this is going to be painting with broad brushstrokes, and this is not always true in terms of gender, that it can sometimes be flipped, but I'm going to say probably majority, and I hope that I'm right in this. Probably the majority, it's like young men, when they're boys, a lot of times they get exposed to pornography, and it kind of awakens this thing in them. And we see neurologically, the more that you use porn, the more that your brain is taught to think of when you see an attractive woman, that's what you want to do. And maybe it was originally you only saw like a very like seldom like a woman at the beach, and that made your mind go there. But eventually when you wear that pathway down, it's like, I just see a woman down the street and I'm like, now I want to watch porn. So that goes for a while. And then a guy will start dating a girl. And if they're both Christians, then they think, well, this is so ridiculous. You know, if I marry this girl, then I won't have to deal with my porn addiction. Then it'll get rid of it for me because
Totally.
she'll actually support all, like she'll fulfill all those sexual urges. And so they
Hmm.
can say, well, I want that in advance of marriage. And then
Sure.
a lot of girls, because there's that performative part of dating that it's like, you want to be seen as I love you and I care for you and I want to do what you want to do. They're more than happy to fulfill those desires of the person, of the guy. And like I said, it can be reversed. It can be the
Sure.
girl and the guy flip these roles. But by and large, the problem is though, then when they get married, the desires don't go away. Pornography doesn't magically go away. And a lot of women are like, I'm not going to do this every time that you want to do this. You're going to be, and so a lot of guys will keep watching porn. It gets worse and worse. And so I almost think that the distinction is not like between promiscuity and non-promiscuity. It's almost like selfish and unselfish. And so the guy, it's usually the guy, but like I said, it can be reversed.
Hmm.
They have to deal with the self-control issue at some point. It's either going to happen when they're younger, when they're single, or if they're married. At some point, they have to deal with the self-control because, in my opinion, sex is at its most beautiful when it's about the other person. When it's not, I'm going to you to get my needs met. And I think that's the picture where Paul says you give yourself to the other person in this act of love and trying to care for them. And that's kind of what binds you. Like any couple will say, yeah, I feel so attracted to my spouse when they're like, I need you to have sex. And like that's the opposite
Right.
of it. So,
Right.
so I don't know. That's a long-winded answer. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're referring to is it's called neuroplasticity, right? Our brains are plastic. They can be molded. And as neurons fire down a path, right, that path gets worn down. So the path of not having self-control, of being like, I'm just going to get my needs met with this person, that path gets lowered too, right? So then when it comes up in marriage, right? So, okay, you're like, whatever, I want this we're going to get married anyways. Let's say you do marry the same person. What's the harm in that? Well, there is harm, right? Because you did not have self-control before you got married, right? And you broke this belief that you had, right? Like this, you're talking about somebody who was like, yeah, we really shouldn't have sex before marriage, but whatever, we're going to do it anyways, right? So then you haven't had that self-control. Now it's going to be easier to make that bad decision again. Not to say that there's not redemption or that God can't redeem, absolutely, but just from a like neurological standpoint, right? It's not as high of a hill to get over to break that. Also, as you watch pornography, you require more and more and more stimulus to become aroused. Okay. So it is not just like, instead of pornography, I can just have sex with my wife. Well, that's just not going to be enough for you anymore, right? You're going to have to get even more and even more and even more. And so it's not even that the wife isn't meeting his needs or whatever. Again, could be reversed, absolutely. But that it's requiring more and more and more stimulus, right? It's literally like a drug. It's actually works exactly like a drug that your body makes, but still a drug. And you need more and more and more to get that hit, which is you're going to have to look elsewhere or get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and you see that trajectory, like I mean, some people could say, well, that's a slippery slope. Like, it kind of actually is a slippery slope. Like,
Like
if
it
people,
is. Yeah.
yeah, if people start watching porn, it's usually something a little more not so explicit, and usually the trajectory is it gets more and more explicit, like exactly for those reasons that you're talking about. So lots of churches will lay down, here's the boundaries,
Hmm.
and they all lay them down at different places. Some
Right.
churches say nothing. Some churches say kissing. Do you
Yes.
feel like you can support the idea of a couple that wants to not have sex before they get married using boundaries without saying here's what the boundaries have to be for everyone? Does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that like if you're looking at a road, right, and there's a ditch on either side, let's call the ditch like sexual immorality, and you're not wanting to get in the ditch. Some people don't need super high guardrails and they'll just stay on the road. Some people need like concrete walls, right? And so I think that that's just being wise to say, hey, here's what me and my significant other need. And again, if I'm having this conversation with 15-year-olds, it's going to be a very different conversation, and I'm going to help them set boundaries. I'm going to say, hey, how are some ways that we can like set boundaries. I like talk about, like, if your swimsuit is covering an area, then maybe, let's not touch it, right? Like, there's lots of ways that I use to kind of talk to kids about it. If you're in your 20s, you can make that decision for yourself. How big are the guardrails to keep you from going in the ditch if that's what you're trying to avoid?
Yeah, yeah. And that's the point, right? Like, there's some people on this call who are like, I disagree with every single thing you're saying. I think this is absolute BS. And if you're on that call and you're going to do what you want to do, that's fine. We can't force you. This is not a dictatorship, right? So yeah. So Rebecca, we're just about out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, talking about a wild topic on a Tuesday night. Maybe most of the people on the call will never come back. We really hope that's not the case. Like I said at the beginning, if there's people on this call who disagree, I would say wrestle through it. Let's wrestle through it. Let's talk about it together. Let's wrestle through it. So everyone give a big thank you to Rebecca.